Every ant colony operates under a profound biological illusion that their queen is untouchable, guarded deep within a subterranean fortress. But some invaders don't care about foraging for food or expanding territory. They want the throne itself. And the terrifying reality is that the assassination has already begun from within. The invading queen does not attack with raw violence. She begins with a calculation of pure chemical camouflage. She rubs her body aggressively against dead host workers, absorbing their exact hydrocarbons onto her own cuticle shell. She lingers in the shadows until her entire surface profile renders an identical match to the host colony's signature scent. Because ants identify friend from foe purely by the language of smell, the disguised imposter takes her first step inside. She walks directly past heavily armed soldier guards who stand completely blind to the threat, pacified by the fake scent. She moves deeper into the subterranean maze, completely unbothered, bypassing the very workers sworn to protect the kingdom. Now she approaches the one individual she can never truly fool with scent alone, the reigning queen. In the deepest, quietest room of the nest, a patient, horrific execution is initiated. In species like Bothriomyrmex, this assassination is not a swift strike, but a grueling test of endurance. The invading queen climbs directly onto the host queen's back and grips her tightly, remaining anchored for hours and even days. She begins a slow, methodical sawing motion, utilizing her sharp mandibles to patiently sever the host queen's head entirely. Because the execution happens slowly and in absolute darkness, the surrounding host workers never register an attack. Nothing appears wrong to the collective colony mind until the decapitation is completely finalized. The horror completes itself almost immediately after the host queen's body goes cold. In a profound subversion of loyalty, the host workers instantly approach and begin to calmly groom the assassin queen. She smells correct, she sits on the royal throne, and as far as the collective colony intelligence knows, their mother never died. The usurper begins reproducing immediately, pumping out her own genetic lineages into the host nest. The loyal host workers, driven blindly by pheromones rather than true identity, raise her offspring exactly as their own. This initiates the slow generational long game of a total demographic replacement. The original host workers live out their natural lives, working frantically for a sovereign that was never theirs. Generation by generation, the original inhabitants die off from old age and wear, replaced entirely by the imposter's biological children. Eventually, not a single member of the original genetic line remains alive within the fortress. An entire empire has changed hands, its borders and infrastructure stolen without a single visible battlefield. But not every takeover in the subterranean world is executed with this quiet, insidious patience. Some parasitic species skip the chemical disguise entirely and choose to storm the target colony through absolute, unmitigated force. These heavily armed queens simply sprint straight down the main tunnels, tearing apart defenders and executing the native monarch in a public blitzkrieg. This chaotic, brutal frontal assault triggers a shorter, high-intensity shockwave that completely subdues the colony through raw terror. But whether through the bloody blitzkrieg or a silent chemical deception, the ultimate result is identical. The architecture of the target empire remains intact, but the mind directing it has been completely replaced by an alien force. This unsettling biological coup is not a rare anomaly. It is a widespread foundational driver of subterranean evolution. Scattered beneath the soil right now, there are countless empires operating under queens who were never born within their borders. Stay tuned as we continue to tear open the secret blueprints operating right within the hidden networks of our world. To truly comprehend this ruthless underground warfare, we must analyze the strict evolutionary constraints that forced its development. Starting a brand new colony from scratch is an incredibly low probability gamble for a solitary queen ant. After her nuptial flight, a standard queen must shed her wings, burrow underground, and survive entirely on her internal fat reserves. Over 99% of these independent founding queens perish due to dehydration, fungal disease, or immediate predation. The parasitic queens of species like Bothriomyrmex and Polyergus have evolved a biological cheat code to bypass this bottleneck entirely. Instead of expending immense energy to build a workforce, they simply hijack a pre-existing, fully functioning industrial empire. They let a rival queen do the grueling work of raising the initial generation, digging the tunnels, and establishing security lines. And then they step in to harvest the complete infrastructure through targeted high-stakes espionage. The critical component of this heist is the collection of the host colony's specific cuticular hydrocarbon profile. These hydrocarbons act as a dynamic biological barcode worn on the exterior wax layer of every single ant in the nest. If an ant's barcode deviates even slightly from the colony standard, it is immediately recognized as an alien intruder and torn to pieces. To acquire this passkey, the parasitic queen must locate a solitary host worker at the periphery of the colony's zone. She neutralizes the worker quickly, often using specialized paralytic secretions that leave the host's exoskeleton completely intact. Then, the exquisite process of chemical harvesting initiates, requiring absolute physical contact to ensure a perfect transfer. She grooms the dead worker meticulously, wiping the oily secretions over her own head, thorax, legs, and abdomen. This ensures that when she enters the nest, she is not merely hidden by a mask, she is structurally cloaked by their own identity. As she enters the primary nest gates, she must pass through a gauntlet of continuous olfactory screening. Ants have thousands of sensory sensilla on their antennae that act like a hypersensitive chemical scanning array. Every worker she meets touches her briefly with these appendages, executing a real-time authentication protocol. The disguised queen suppresses her own natural panic response, moving with absolute calm to avoid triggering alarm pheromones. If her heart rate spikes or she exudes a single molecule of stress chemical, the illusion shatters instantly. But the chemical cloak holds, and she descends into the lower tiers where the environmental conditions change drastically. The temperature drops, the humidity climbs, and the concentration of native pheromones becomes suffocatingly dense. This is the nursery sector, packed with millions of fragile eggs, developing larvae, and thousands of highly protective nurse ants. The nurse ants are programmed to execute any anomaly with zero hesitation to protect the genetic future of the hive. Yet they extend their food supplies and offer full access to the disguised queen, completely fooled by the hydrocarbon profile. She filters through the nursery layer until she stands at the threshold of the final, massive royal chamber. Here, the reigning monarch is constantly laying eggs, a biological engine driving the entire demographic output of the nest. The host queen possesses a massive physical advantage, often weighing up to 4 times more than the slender parasitic invader. In a straight physical brawl, the smaller invader would be instantly crushed and dismembered by the massive jaws of the sovereign. Therefore, the assassination requires absolute stealth, leveraging patience as her primary tactical weapon. She approaches from the blind spot directly behind the queen's massive abdomen, moving at a microscopic pace. She scales the shell plates, anchoring her legs firmly into the soft membrane joints where the host queen cannot reach her. Once safely positioned on the host queen's back, she begins an execution that defies all standard rules of animal conflict. She positions her jaws over the cervical joint, the narrow, highly vulnerable structural column connecting the head to the thorax. And then, she begins to saw, applying continuous, rhythmic mechanical pressure to cut through the heavy chitin layer. The host queen shifts and thrashes violently, attempting to scrape the parasite off against the rough dirt walls of the chamber. But the invader's legs are modified with hyper-developed claws that lock into the host's armor loops, making her completely impossible to dislodge. This agonizing slow-motion struggle can continue uninterrupted for 48 to 72 hours. To the surrounding worker ants, this frantic movement is completely misinterpreted due to a masterclass in chemical redirection. As the parasite cuts into the queen, she simultaneously releases massive quantities of specialized appeasement and propaganda pheromones. These chemical signals broadcast a continuous message of peace and absolute normalcy directly into the brains of the surrounding workers. The propaganda chemicals are so powerful that they overwrite the workers' basic visual and mechanical observation networks. They see their mother thrashing in a life-or-death struggle, but their chemical inputs tell them that everything is operating within safe parameters. So they continue to sort larvae, clean the chamber walls, and perform routine maintenance while their sovereign is slowly decapitated. Finally, the mechanical threshold of the cervical spine is breached, and the host queen's massive head falls into the soil dust. The biological engine of the original colony has been completely and irrevocably shut down. The parasite queen immediately detaches from the corpse and slips into the exact geographic center of the royal throne room. What happens next is perhaps the most unsettling display of biological brainwashing found anywhere in nature. The host workers do not register the dead body of their biological mother with grief or alarm responses. Instead, they approach the assassin, extend their forelegs, and begin to groom her with absolute devotion. Normalcy immediately replaces horror. She smells right, she sits where their queen once sat, and the colony's continuity framework remains unbroken. The usurper switches her metabolic gear from espionage to hyper-output reproductive generation. She begins laying hundreds of eggs every hour, anchoring her own parasitic genetic line directly into the infrastructure of the stolen nest. The host workers organize these foreign eggs into pristine geometric stacks, unaware that they are cultivating their own replacement. This initiates the silent, generational long game where the demographic profile of the fortress changes entirely over time. Host workers live out their fixed, natural lifespans, performing intensive foraging runs and structural maintenance for a sovereign that was never theirs. As they perish one by one from physical exhaustion and age, they are not replaced by native sisters. Instead, the new generation hatching from the nursery consists entirely of the parasite queen's hyper-aggressive children. Within a year, the entire demographic transition completes itself down to the absolute last individual. The original species has been completely wiped out from the location, yet their stolen empire continues to buzz with flawless efficiency. But the subterranean ecosystem has engineered an alternative, far more explosive strategy for royal replacement. In species like the slave-making ant Polyergus, there is zero patience for chemical espionage or slow-motion assassinations. The Raider Queen charges straight down the main gates, surrounded by a vanguard of highly specialized shock troop soldiers. They skip the disguise completely, organizing massive, coordinated military invasions to storm rival nests by direct force. They execute defensive guards with rapid, hyper-aggressive mandatory strikes, creating a state of complete structural panic. This Blitzkrieg method completely bypasses the security screening arrays by overwhelming them with sheer physical velocity. The Raider Monarch breaks into the royal core, kills the native queen in a public display of raw dominance, and instantly claims the space. Whether executed through an explosive blitzkrieg or an insidious, silent chemical deception, the terminal blueprint remains uniform. The dynamic infrastructure of the conquered colony remains fully operational, but the mind directing its output has been entirely replaced. This chilling asymmetric warfare is not an isolated evolutionary quirk. It is a foundational pillar driving subterranean development. Scattered deep beneath the Earth's surface right now, thousands of macro-empires are operating under an absolute biological lie. The workers continue their exhausting loops for a sovereign who executed their mother and systematically replaced their entire genetic line. They remain blind to the coup, operating as perfect mechanical nodes inside an empire that was stolen right beneath their feet. Stay tuned as we continue to tear open the secret blueprints operating right within the hidden networks of our world.